Hi, everyone. So I just had the wonderful experience of concluding a year of study with a group at my synagogue here, really sweet group of people whose humanity shines through in all of our learning, whose curiosity for Torah and whose concern for each other have been really remarkable and beautiful to share in. It's a group that I've been glad to learn with for the last year, and we have studied all of Tanakh. We have studied the entire Hebrew Bible, one book at a time, and we've covered a lot of material, though, of course, in order to go deeply into the text, we have to give it much more attention than we've been able to. But a year survey through the Hebrew Bible, through the Tanakh, has been quite beautiful. And to end on Yom HaShoah, which was not actually planned, to end on the day where we commemorate the Holocaust and the heroism in Israel. The day is known as Yom HaShoah vehaGevurah, a day of Holocaust and of heroism, chosen in part because the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising had a landmark moment on this day in history. So it is not about the Jew going into history and having things done to her or him. It is about fighting, even in the complicated narrative where we did not win, we stood up. And to be an upstander in the world is very much part of the ritual message, at least that I take from this powerful and sad day in our history. It also wasn't part of the original plan to culminate our learning on Yom HaShoah, on this day, with the book of Esther, which is a book that we read on the holiday of Purim. It's a strange juxtaposition of text and day and schedule and souls and hearts. So what I wanted to share was a brief thought, and this is in honor of my students and in appreciation for the Tanakh, in appreciation for this holiest of books, the Jewish people's diary, as it were. The book of Esther is typified by a few different things. Among the most commonly known is that God doesn't make an explicit appearance. This is not the moment where the sea splits because God does the miracle. God actually never explicitly speaks. There are moments where God sort of peeks through, but only if that's how you read the story. It's a fascinating thing. Not only does God's name never appear in the book of Esther, the story is so strange that for scholars like Aviva Zornberg, they have suggested that the story can make no sense unless you believe there's a plan, unless God is making things happen. So for instance, there is a king who is such a buffoon that the party goes on for a year with unceasing alcohol and a harem of thousands of people. And then out of all of these people, he selects a new bride who turns out is a hidden Jew. And that is part of Jewish history being written into, Jewish mythic history being written into what purports to be a historical book, even though really no one thinks of the book of Esther as history. It is very much written in a farcical kind of tone. It's satire. This is what the ruling power usually is like, a buffoon who is so susceptible to the suggestions of their advisors that they end up doing whatever the last person said. That isn't only a current headline in America, that is very much how power works. Also, if you look at the parts of the story that don't make any sense, how is it possible that she was chosen and then Mordecai happened to hear about the assassination plot and he happened to communicate it to her and she happened to be able to gain entrance? And then when she gained entrance into the king's abode, that she invites him and the bad guy, who is of course a caricature of evil, to this party so that she can let the king know that this bad guy is threatening to kill all of the Jews. So when they come to the party, what does she do? She invites them to another party. And part of what this means is that the story makes no sense. Aviva Zornberg says, Nora Alila. It's a tangled skein. It can't possibly be one absurd coincidence after another until the point where we come to the end of the story. In fact, the central motif in the scroll of Esther is nafochu. It's turned on its head. I had a roommate in rabbinical school who was a vegetarian, but on Purim he would eat meat because nothing makes any sense. In fact, one of the central rules, or it's not a rule, it's a custom that some people take advantage of inappropriately, is in the Talmud it says you're supposed to drink until you don't know the difference between Baruch Mordechai and Arur Haman, which means blessed is Mordechai and cursed is Haman. It's dangerous, and I happen to right now be sitting in a synagogue that was once a liquor store. And it is a danger. The chair of my search committee is a very public recovering alcoholic who says, when this place was a liquor store, I worshipped here. And now this worship is elevated. So I don't take this rule lightly, nor do I consider it a rule. In fact, much of rabbinic tradition has attempted to change that rule. And you'll see how this works back into Yom HaShoah. The idea that you're supposed to drink until the point where you can't tell the difference between blessed is Mordechai and cursed is Haman, number one, that's impossible. No matter how drunk you get, you will always know the difference between those two phrases until you black out. Is that a desired thing? There's a suggestion that some have, Haman wanted to destroy our bodies, so we drink in excess to destroy our brains so that all we have left is our bodies. Yuck. Another suggestion, based on the gematria, the numeric value of Baruch Mordechai, blessed is Mordechai, and Arur Haman, cursed is Haman, is that the gematria, the numeric value of those two phrases, is exactly the same. There's no difference between such a caricature of good and a caricature of bad, because neither one of them is real. The real question is, what do you do when you inherit a moment of influence and power? The suggestion that the rabbis end up settling on, and this is the one that I teach, is that actually there needs to be a place for gladness even in the bleakest moments of our mythic history and our real history. On Yom HaShoah, we don't need to point really all that far to see what it is to have the darkest moment of our existence. And as we live in this moment, the question is, can you live in this moment? Can you live in a real world that includes that kind of suffering? So the rabbis suggest, drink a little bit if it's not dangerous to you, laugh a little bit, and then go to sleep. And when you're asleep, you won't be able to tell the difference between blessed is Mordechai and cursed is Haman. In the book of Esther, there are so many things that I didn't see as a child, and we don't see unless we look for them, which is violence. Violence and violence and violence. And, Bana Devorah Haberman, Aleh Shalom, pointed to the use of Esther by Mordechai. Degradation of women. The way women are described. Vashti stands up for her own dignity, and look what happens to her. Esther stands up for her dignity. She's a heroine, but look at the image of being a woman that is exemplified in the Megillah. And the image of the man who uses the woman. It's a degradation to both genders. And the buffoon of HaShoah, whose scepter is clearly not just a scepter. So what I mean to say by using all of this text, and then to point out at the end of chapter 8, Perek Chet of the Megillah, is that we turn the tables on Haman through this crazy series of events. And then what happens? Everybody's afraid of the Jews. And many people, it says, converted to Judaism for fear of the Jews. Is that what we would have happen on Yom HaShoah, looking at what has happened to the Jews throughout history? Would we choose to have this power and to be feared? I was recently watching a lecture by Ruth Weiss, who is just among the greatest of living Jewish scholars in America. Her politics might be different than mine sometimes, but her wisdom is something that I just stand in awe of and admire and intend to continue learning from. Her teaching about Jews and power is based in her expertise in Yiddish literature. And she has often said, people ask, why is a scholar of Yiddish literature so interested in Jewish power? She said, because the communities that Yiddish literature came from were communities of deeply interwoven and caring people. Yes, we had our thieves and we had our murderers and we were just as human as everyone else. But the tight-knit community that gave birth to Yiddish literature had a high notion of its own sense of morality. Whether or not it lived up to it, it was concerned. And it is no more. Because it wasn't interested in power, it had no notion of wielding power. So the question that we ask, and the book of Esther makes us ask, is what do you do when you have power? What do you do when you could be the one that someone else is afraid of? What do you do? Nafochu. Suddenly, everything is on its head. You're in charge. What kind of power do you wish to wield in the world? And on Yom HaShoah, we ask this question too. Number one, we know what it is to lose everything. We know what it is to be hurt. We know what it is to be powerless and vulnerable. The question that we must ask ourselves now is, we are not powerless. We are not vulnerable. What do we do now? That's not just a question in the state of Israel, where, thank God, after millennia of powerlessness, we have come into our own home and gained power. We have an army. Do we wish to be feared? And are we so quick to criticize our imperfect morality on a national level? Are we so quick to criticize it that we don't wonder to ourselves, do we need some of that power? What is the ethical use of power that we wield in the world? Now that we have power, what do we do? What comes next? So here's what I ask us to think about on this day of all days. Number one, this is a day where we stood up as if we could turn the tables on the Nazis in the Warsaw Ghetto. And maybe we did, because the notion of Jew in the world changed in a radical way on that day. I am blessed to know in my community one of the survivors of the Warsaw Ghetto, Ben Stern. So let me tell you what he witnessed, tell you what he's taught me, and then close for now. I feel like this story and this teaching is just meant to be the one that we go through and we go through and we go through and we go through until the day where we don't need to worry about who has power anymore. Wouldn't that be nice? Won't that day be an amazing day when we all put down our weapons and no one has any reason to fear anymore? Ben Stern witnessed in the Warsaw Ghetto not just Mordechai and Alevich, who there's this iconic bronze relief at the Warsaw Ghetto and also at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. Mordechai and Alevich is not the image of Jew that you think of when you see the Jews being pushed into exile, being forced into exile, carrying our holy things on our back, becoming enslaved. It's a notion actually that the book of Esther has, because if we don't have power, we're going to be slaughtered. So we need power. And then the book presumes that we'll want to use that power to hurt someone else, God forbid. Mordechai and Alevich is bare-chested and muscular and holding a Molotov cocktail. There's weapons. The Jew fights back. Now the question is, if I have that kind of power and I don't need to fight, or if I have that kind of power and I can use it to just make the fighting stop, how do I do that? How can we use our power to not hurt? Because the book of Esther doesn't presume that you can live in a world where nobody needs power. And maybe I'm just being naive. Maybe I'm being Pollyannish to believe that there's a world that can exist where no one needs a gun. But I choose to believe in that world. I choose to believe in a world where the story of Esther is not just satire, it's not understandable anymore, where nobody uses anybody. Nobody takes advantage of anybody. So with this teaching, I'll close. The name of the book of Esther in Hebrew is Megillat Esther. The scroll of Esther is its literal translation. It has been suggested, and I believe this to my core, that Megillat Esther is actually the answer to those words. Megillat means the scroll of, but it also is just like the word megale, reveals. Esther, her name, is just like the word Hester, hidden. In the Shoah, the Holocaust, and in many moments of our own history and many people's histories, suffering and suffering and suffering. Genocide, and we are not the only people who suffers. We are not the only people who has suffered. Nebuch. Unfortunately, we are not the only people who will suffer. How do we think about God in those moments? Can we think about God in those moments? Where is God in those moments? And it is one thing to hear Elie Wiesel's message resonate even after his passing. The question is not where was God? The question is where was man? Where were people? But that doesn't answer my theological question, because I still cry to the God that I've davened to my whole life. The rabbinic response to where God has been is Hester Panim. God hid God's face. I don't know how to understand that. How could God hide? But the other way of saying it is, how could God possibly witness what we do to each other? The book of Esther has God's name explicitly, but it is Megale et HaHester. It reveals that which has been hidden. So what I daven for in this moment, and I offer this prayer in memory of the 6 million, I offer this prayer with gratitude for the group of beautiful people I've learned Tanakh with for the last year. And I offer it as a comfort to myself and to you. I offer it for my children. I offer it to people I don't know. Maybe I even offer it to those who still think they need power. Because I pray that we don't. I pray we don't want it. Maybe if we wield power, we only do it so that no one hurts anybody. Megillat Esther, the scroll of Esther, maybe it is a chance to say it is Megale et HaEsther. The scroll of Esther reveals that which is hidden. And what's hidden in the book of Esther? God. There's no explicit reference to God. I once heard the mayor of Haifa ask this question. Why do you think it is that there really isn't religious tension in the city of Haifa in the north of Israel? Baha'i is a world religion. One of its centers is in Haifa. Christianity is very present. Judaism is present. And certainly Islam is present. He said, it is better here because 3 great people never walked here, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad. Maybe that's because the people who say that they are followers of those religious traditions think that there's only enough God for one of them. Maybe that's been hidden too, that there's more than enough God for all of us. There's more than enough world for all of us. There's more than enough power for all of us. So maybe what we really need is to let some of the book go. Some of the trauma go. Some of the memory go. Maybe we need a little bit less God intoxication. It's Daniel Hartman language. Maybe we need to be a little bit less drunk on God and a little bit more aware of the image of God that is right before you when you look at another human being. May we be blessed to see that which is hidden, which is God in each other's eyes. May we not look past each other when we walk past each other on the street, pausing actually to say, how are you? Because Mordechai was told to bow, not asked who he was. And Haman is a cartoon, not even a real character. And HaShoah is a buffoon of a leader, and we have plenty of those. But they're also human beings. Maybe no one ever stopped to ask them how they were. So that doesn't forgive people for the wrong that they do. It just means no one is a caricature. And maybe the deepest message is not even God. Not even God is a caricature, as portrayed by presence or absence in our holiest of books. So may we be blessed in a day of memory and resilience, of heroism and awareness. To actually just pause and recognize that things do not need to be the way they were. And the world, please God, should someday arrive at a place where it needs no weapons, needs no power, where you feel safe enough that you don't think you need power over anybody. May we be that blessed.